Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by CBS. DMV is a brand new workplace comedy turning misery into magic and chaos into comedy. Starring Harriet Dyer and Tim Meadows, DMV is here to serve you laughs. Watch October 13th at 8:30, 7:30 Central on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Optimism isn't sunshine and rainbows. It's fixing things, changing the way we fix things. It's running the world on smarter energy. Because if optimism never stops, then change can't either. GE Vernova, the energy of change.
Welcome, pretties, to the What the Hell Were You Thinking Spooktacular 2025. 99 problems, but a witch. 8-1. I don't know how I'm supposed to take a legal system seriously when everybody in the courtroom's wearing a powdered wig. Ass.
The following podcast contains...
What the f*** you do that for? Hey, that was... Don't swear. What are we? Werewolves, not swearwolves.
explicit language.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that asks a simple question. When your legal finding included testimony from a spirit witness, what the hell were you thinking? I'm your host, Dave Bledsoe, and this episode number 510, Smack My Witch Up edition of the show. It is part 2 of Spooktacular 2025, where we talk about when the witchy business got real dangerous. Stay tuned. Hark! The What the Devil Wert Thou Thinking broadcast is presented by Turgidson and Smythe, Bannister of Witches. But not every hag is in truth a witch. Art thou wrongfully charged with sorcery? Do the townsfolk believe thou hast cursed their fowl? Hath one implied that thou didst dally with a fiend upon a virgin's grave at midnight? Then thou requireth Turgidson and Smythe. For 20 years we have defended those accused of dark arts within the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and have oft persuaded cases downward from a simple hanging from a fiery stake. If accused of dark practices, defend thyself not, but summon Turgidson and Smythe, Bannister of Witches.
I see women like you all the time. Hard, impenetrable, revealing none of what's inside. But then I set to work, and all of a sudden, oh look, she's broken. And it all comes out.
I fucking told you!
See, I'm so sorry. I thought she was...
I told you I ain't done nothing!
Silence, fiend!
Do you have to be that close? Your dick is in my armpit.
My dick is not in her armpit.
Some of it is.
It's not, love. I wouldn't.
Careful, don't go the witch. I'm not a witch. Tell that to my pig. I never wanted him to die. And how are you planning on getting the pork out? Does he shit bacon, does he? You have the devil in you, lady. Contrary, idle, and why does she live alone? What sort of woman remains unmarried? Lots of women are unmarried. Your sister's unmarried.
She's not unmarried the way you're unmarried. There's something not right about the way you're unmarried.
I agree, actually.
Oh,
fuck off, Anne.
I swear to God, I will hit you.
Put the jug down. No one leaves this room without my express permission. Old Myers will now bag the suspect's possessions as evidence while
Who are you?
I'm the witch finder.
Finally. You know, they said a witch finder was coming, and I thought, do you know what? Good. Someone with half a brain to sort this out. I said, as long as he knows what he's going on about, then that's great.
As long as I
know what you're going on about, and that's great.
I do know what I'm going on about.
Then that's great.
I've alluded a time or two to attending a fairly respectable, some might even say prestigious university, and how I had to drop out.
Yes, we've all heard your tragic origin story.
Now, the reason I had to drop out was purely financial because prestigious universities were, even then, rather expensive, and before I dropped out, I'd been kind of going for free.
Full scholarship, huh?
No, I was working there as a campus cop. Now, I was good at that job, but being on the younger side myself, barely older than the students, I had a somewhat different perspective on how to be a campus cop. I operated on the fairly simple philosophy of...
I love shenanigans, as long as no one gets hurt.
Which made me rather popular among the student body. I'm not going to drop the hammer on people drinking underage when I spent so many years drinking underage myself and weed.
Yes, please!
Just keep it on the down low and everybody's happy. Just don't break anything, burn anything, or get anyone hurt, and we can all enjoy our college experience together. Serious things, however, I took very seriously, including things like sexual assault. And this proved to be a problem, because the university wanted to pretend that that kind of thing didn't happen there. It did, and I said so publicly, and this made powerful people quite mad, because it was bad for business, it seems. Long story short, the powers that be decided that I had to go.
A lot of holes in the desert.
Problem was, I hadn't actually done anything wrong. In fact, I was doing my actual job when I talked about preventing and reporting sexual assault, so it was necessary to find another reason to let me go. Did I mention that I was very young and very popular with the students, and also I like to drink from time to time?
Well, there's an understatement.
So it was not an entirely uncommon sight for me to be at a party off-duty in my role as a fellow student. Now, I was careful not to go to parties in the freshman and sophomore dorms where clearly there were underage drinkers, and the young women at those parties were just a bit younger than would be prudent for me. But seniors were all of legal age in every respect. And I want to be clear, I did nothing criminal. Maybe a few immoral acts, but only with consent. But the appearance of wrongdoing was enough to have me dragged into an interview with my superiors where they laid out several spurious allegations about my drinking with underage students and abusing my position of authority to get said students to have sex with me, which was just fucking ludicrous. I was a campus cop. No one thought of me as a person with authority. I was a rent-a-cop at best, and everyone knew it, albeit I was a cool rent-a-cop. But the allegations made it clear that some kind of hunt was going on. The kind of hunt that maybe could be described, I don't know, as a witch hunt. Which brings me to this week's topic, that time in history when the only good witch was a burning witch. I mean, it totally wrecked the whole witch economy and made being a village wise woman a very dangerous occupation. So, let's talk about how witches became evil. But first, we got to talk about the Protestant Reformation.
Why do you do this?
Because you don't get one without the other. For about a millennia and a half, Christianity, well, Western Christianity, meant that you were Catholic. The church tried to pretend the Eastern Church didn't exist and vice versa. In that time, the Mother Church had become, let's just say, a teensy bit corrupt.
It's a fucking cesspool.
Not so much the local parishes, though they too were problematic, but the church government, from bishop up, was full of fornication, bribery, extortion, theft, adultery, and murder. The church made the Sopranos look like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. There had long been doctrinal differences in the church, differences that from time to time threatened a schism in the church, but always the self-interest of the men in the church kept that from boiling over. But by the early 16th century, those doctrinal differences combined with an overwhelming shittiness of the church leadership resulted in one very angry monk by the name of Martin Luther nailing a letter to the church door in 1517 in Germany, listing in all of his grievances against the church.
I got a lot of problems with you people.
And that airing of grievances sprang the entire Protestant Reformation. Now, I could spend a lot of time explaining a theological dispute if I had to learn it in college before I was forced to drop out, but I got witches to burn here. So let's boil down the entire Protestant Reformation down to a fundamental complaint.
The Pope.
Yeah, they didn't like him. Now, to Catholics, taking the Pope out of the religion is like taking Jesus out. So that was a deal breaker from the start. Arguments turned into disputes, disputes turned into ultimatums, ultimatums turned into schisms, and schisms turned into a whole bunch of people getting fucking killed. The religious wars of the 1500s tore Europe apart as the bond between church and state were ripped apart in places where Protestantism became the dominant religion, and it spread fast because, again, the Catholic Church was really bad at the time, and the parishioners wanted something new. Germany was arguably the hardest hit, but no Western European country escaped unscathed as Catholics and Protestants did to each other what they'd been doing to the Jews pretty much all along. And that is how I can connect the Reformation to the witch trials. From something called the Tudor Blogger. Quote, only the most rapidly developing countries where the Catholic Church was weakest experienced a virulent witch craze, i.e. Germany, France, and Switzerland. Where the Catholic Church was strong, Spain, Italy, and Portugal, hardly any witch craze occurred. Unquote. You see, people had gotten used to rooting around for heresy in their community, meaning killing Catholics, and kind of found that they liked killing people. And they went searching for other people to kill. And hey, how about these old people handing out herbs and curing curses? Those were bad for some reason, you know. Somebody said there was something bad. They're probably a heretic. I bet they fornicate with the devil. We should catch some and torture them and find out. But once we've tortured them into confessing that they're witches, what are we going to do with them?
We could burn it.
And so the hunt for witches on it was in a big way as the powerful discovered that this could be useful to them. And the people doing the hunting invented some pretty terrible things to do to people. They invented some things that even made the Inquisition go, ooh, no, that's a touch harsh. Lest you think witch trials are a purely Christian invention, rest assured, pod friends, it goes much, much further than that. Witch laws have been around at least as long as written laws themselves. The earliest written laws we have, the Code of Hammurabi, as recorded in Wikipedia, quote, if a man has put a spell upon another man and is not yet justified, he upon whom the spell is laid shall go to the holy river. Into the holy river he shall plunge. If the holy river overcomes him and he is drowned, the man who put the spell on him shall take possession of his house. If the holy river declares him innocent and he remains unharmed, the man who laid the spell shall be put to death. He that plunged into the river shall take possession of the house of him that laid the spell upon him, unquote. Clear as day, just like modern law. Magic was taken quite seriously in the ancient world. A weapon as much as a sword. You could use it for defense, but if you used it for evil intent, into the river you went. Laws against witchcraft are in the Old Testament. Early Roman and Imperial Roman laws called for so-called witches, those using magic for evil, to be burnt at the stake, and they were in effect until Christianity became the dominant religion in the empire. Early Christianity, which as I mentioned last week, fully accepted the presence of white magic as part of their conversion mission in their informal permission structure. There were religious punishments for practicing witchcraft, but not criminal laws. By the High Middle Ages, the official position of the church on witches was thus.
I don't think they exist.
A Hungarian king banned the practice of witch hunting in 1100 CE because, according to Wikipedia, quote, he altogether rejected the possibility of many of the alleged powers with which witches were popularly credited. Such, for example, were nocturnal riding through the air, the changing of a person's disposition from love to hate, the control of thunder, rain, and sunshine, the transformation of a man into an animal, the intercourse of incubi and succubi with human beings, and other such superstitions. Not only the attempt to practice such things, but the very belief in their possibility is treated as false and superstitious, unquote. And by the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, the church was far busier dealing with Muslims and Jews than they were worried about witches. The Inquisition was charged with rooting out heresy, and it couldn't be bothered with looking for witches, even when it was confessed to them under the question.
You mean torture, like in pain? That's it.
They just had the civilian authorities execute the women. Perhaps the most famous witch trial in history wasn't even about witchcraft, it was about keeping the French down. Joan of Arc has handed the English a few heaping helpings of whoop-ass during the 100 Years' War, all the while giving the credit to God who guided her in battle. Eventually, she was captured by her enemies and turned over to Henry VI of England, where she was tried for, among other things, wearing men's clothes, daring to defeat the English, and claiming to speak to God, all of which would have been cool if she were a man. She was interrogated, tried, and executed for witchcraft by burning at the stake. And why do we burn witches?
She's made of wood.
Actually, it's because a burnt body can't be resurrected come Judgment Day. I guess Jesus can't put them back together, like with IKEA furniture, and he's lost the instructions. Joan was eventually canonized as a saint in the Catholic Church, but that didn't matter to the English because by the time that happened, England had its own church where the king could do whatever he wanted, no matter what the Pope said. And also, by that time, bonfires were being built all over the Western Europe for all those witches that were suddenly popping up everywhere.
We need some matches. We need some fire.
I mean, the problem was so endemic that someone actually wrote a book to make spotting, trying, and executing a witch easier. This German priest by the name of Heinrich Kramer.
Oh, yeah!
Kramer's work at witch fighting got him booted from several German cities and caused his bishop to refer to him as, quote, senile and crazy, unquote. But as the witch panic swelled, his book, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches, became the go-to handbook for all your witch-finding needs. First printed in 1486, it would make several comebacks over the centuries, with co-authors being added and revisions to the text as new witch lore was added. It was still in use as late as the 18th century, and it was a reference book at the Salem witch trials right here in good old America. And the hammer laid out exactly what it took to be a witch. Let me just pull out my copy here and flip through it and let you know what they are. Here we are. Okay. Ways to determine if she's a witch. Is she a slim, attractive blonde woman who rocks a tasteful miniskirt? When she casts a spell, does she winkle her nose? Does her mother refer to you by a demeaning nickname like Durwood instead of your given name Darren? Is her Uncle Arthur suspiciously camp? And does her doctor only make house calls after invoking him via a rhyming spell? You know what? I'm sorry. This isn't the Malleus at all. This is the show Bible for the TV show Bewitched. According to the actual Malleus, this is how you identify a witch. First, was she a woman? And well, yes, there were men accused of witchery, but if you were dealing with a woman, you were at least halfway there to conviction before you even started to ask the questions. The questions, i.e. torture, were as brutal, and they're summed up in thought.co. Quote, the women were stripped in their cells by other women and examined for any instrument of witchcraft. Hair was to be shaved from their bodies so that the devil's marks could be seen more easily, unquote. What exactly is the devil's mark? It was anything the Inquisitors wanted to be: a mole, a scab, a scar, even a freckle.
That ginger-haired bastard's got enough problems.
Another distinct sign was the presence of a third nipple, with which the accused would suckle her demon familiars. Next, there were the manifestations of her use of witchcraft, more from ThoughtCo. Quote, there were other signs by which the manual claimed a witch could be identified. For example, being unable to weep under torture, or when before a judge, was a sign of being a witch. There are references to an inability to drown or burn a witch who still had any objects of witchcraft concealed or who were under the protection of other witches, unquote. In short, if your witch refused to scream properly while under the question, that meant that she was a witch. If you held her under water or lit her on fire and she didn't die, she was definitely a witch. And if she did die, well, she wasn't a witch, and now she was with Jesus. Then there was a confession, because after you've shaved, stabbed, burnt, dunked underwater, and otherwise tortured, you might just say anything to get it to stop. So here's some more from ThoughtCo. Quote, a witch who confessed quickly was said to have been abandoned by the devil, and those who kept a stubborn silence had the devil's protection. They were said to be more tightly bound to the devil. Torture was seen as essentially an exorcism. It was to be frequent and often, and proceed from gentle to harsh. If the accused witch confessed under torture, however, she must also confess later while not being tortured for the confessions to be valid, unquote. Don't worry, though, because if she recanted the confession after you stopped torturing her, you could definitely start torturing her again. Now, should you confess, you might escape execution, but usually just be turned over to civil authorities who would certainly kill you. You might help yourself by turning in other members of your coven.
She name.
And then those people would go through the process that you just went through as the witch panic kept rolling and more people were tortured and killed. By the time the witch panic hit the American shores, there were some slightly stricter protocols for witch identification. I'm going to summarize these from a Cairo News article from October of 2021. Quote, is she a woman? Women were believed to be much easier for the devil to tempt. Midwives were especially thought of as evil and likely witches. According to the book, they murdered and consumed babies. Does she look like a witch? Reverend John Gall in the 1640s insisted that every old woman with a wrinkled face, a furrowed brow, hairy lip, and a gobber-toothed squint eye, and a squeaking voice or a scolding tongue is not only suspected, but pronounced for a witch. Does a witch cake affect her? You could take the urine of one of the witch's victims and mix it with some rye meal and some ashes from a fireplace and make a little cake. Piss cake. Then you feed to a dog or some other small creature believed to be one of the witch's familiar, a small animal or an imp that's kept by the witch. If the person is a witch, the animal will fall into a trance and start naming names, and the witch will be struck with pain as the animal eats the cake and calls her out. Does she stack up against a Bible? The theory was that if she weighed less than a stack of Bibles, she was guilty. However, in some places you were a witch material if you weighed more than the Bibles. Can she say the Lord's Prayer? It's believed that witches could not say holy words, so they would be asked to recite the Lord's Prayer without a mistake to prove they're innocent. One unfortunate woman misspoke the part of the prayer that says, lead us not into temptation, by dropping the not, and she was quickly hanged by asking God to lead everyone into be tempted by sin, unquote. Witch trials were at their peak in Europe for about 60 years between 1560 and 1630, with an estimated 40 to 60,000 deaths from either the testing or the executions. Many scholars think most died of malnutrition and disease in prison, waiting for trial or execution. And while burning was the most commonly associated witch punishment, the method of actual executions were much more often hanging, with the bodies burnt afterwards. This is for a pretty simple reason. It's kind of unpleasant to watch someone being burnt to the stake. There's a lot of pleading and some screaming that goes on for a really long time until they finally suffocate from the smoke, and that just takes forever to get that smell of burnt witch out of your clothes. Better to hang them and then burn them somewhere else out of the way. The causes of the witch panic are still debated to this day, with different scholars holding different opinions, and each of them are valid. The horrors of the Black Death reverberated through a vastly diminished society, and once you've run out of Jews to blame, you gotta find someone to fill their roles. And the religious wars had a lot of people hunting for heretics, and the people often accused of witchcraft did not fit neatly into societal norms, so heretic witches. And the new society that came out of the Black Death also saw a shift of the roles of women and men in those societies, and many feminist scholars see the witch panics as a backlash against the increased stature of women. My pet theory that male doctors kicked it off as a way to eliminate competition is actually the thesis of a notable book by the respected authors of Barbara Ehrenreich and Deidre English, and that kind of hold to this position, though it's folded into a larger thesis about the place of women in society. And the question of the European witch panic is complex, and I think all of those reasons played some part in how it came to happen. But once it ended, and it did so fairly quickly, and only sporadic flare-ups happened over there, but here in America, we have a much better idea of why it flared up in the first place.
America sucks!
Because Americans then and Americans now are really fucking stupid. The 70-year-old Puritan colony in Massachusetts had stabilized, grown, and largely prospered after its rough start. It had grown from a shade over 500 people to nearly 50,000 people and established a government that was much theocratic as it was civil. Technically, church leaders were not allowed to serve in the government, but that didn't really matter because the parishioners were going to obey them before they obeyed the government anyway. The problem was, by 1692, the colony was experiencing something of an identity crisis. A lot of dubious people had settled the area. And by dubious, I mean they were not all of the Puritan faith, and some of them were even Wait for it! Catholic.
Dear God.
The settlement of Salem Village was not a happy place. It was full of petty disputes between the residents because of property lines, grazing rights, and church privileges, and the residents of nearby villages considered the Salem folks quarrelsome, which is, of course, Puritan speak for
bunch of assholes.
So things were tense in Salem town in February of 1692, when the daughter of and the niece of two different girls, Reverend Samuel Parris, began to experience fits beyond the power of epileptic or natural causes. The girls claimed to be pinched or stuck with pins, but no physical cause could be found for their fits by the local doctor. Another local reverend was brought in, and he put down his observations in a pamphlet titled, quote, "A brief but true narrative of some remarkable passages relating to the sundry persons afflicted by witchcraft at Salem Village, which happened from the 19th of March to the 5th of April in 1692, which opened thusly, quote, the ensuing narrative being a collection of some remarkables in an affair now upon the stage, by credible eyewitnesses, is now offered unto the reader as only a taste of that more may follow in God's time, if the prayers of good people may obtain this favor of God, that the mysterious assaults from hell, now being made upon so many friends, may be thoroughly detected and defeated. We suppose that the curious will be entertained with as rare an history, and perhaps an age has not whereof this narrative is but a full runner," unquote. It goes on from there, and it gets far more convoluted. Soon more girls, all of which were basically under 13, just barely hitting puberty, were afflicted with similar symptoms. And finally, one of the girls could put a cause to their strange afflictions. It was none other than three local women: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. Sarah Good was poor, and she didn't get along with her husband. Sarah Osborne dared to think herself, I'm as good as any man and I don't need no man. And Tituba was there because she was black. There were dozens of other petty disputes and reasons for the accusations, but those were the main charges. Over the next few months, more names would join the list as petty grievances were repaid or the accused didn't believe the accusers, and there was financial gain of even a tiny amount by those accusing them. I mean, come on, one of the accused was the 4-year-old daughter of Sarah Good because, toddlers can be a terror. And if things had stopped there, the Salem witch trials probably wouldn't be remembered like they are today, but things got a little out of hand as more and more names were named and by the accused and various young girls of the countryside, and so over 200 people would go on to be accused of witchcraft and questioned, i.e. tortured, and 20 of them were executed based on little more than the word of a few preteen girls and spectral evidence. From the Salem Witch Museum, quote, spectral evidence refers to witness testimony that the accused person's spirit or a spectral shape appeared to their witnesses in a dream at the time the accused person's physical body was at another location. It was accepted in the courts during the Salem witch trials. The evidence was accepted on the basis that the devil and his minions were powerful enough to send their spirits or specters to pure religious people in order to lead them astray. In spectral evidence, the admission of victims' conjecture is governed only by the limits of their fears and imaginations, whether or not objectively proven facts are forthcoming to justify them. Unquote. The accusations would continue for months until some of the names being named were people of quality, good reputation, and standing in the community.
Those rich white folks.
And that just wasn't going to fly. The colonial government got involved, and pretty soon the witch panic dried up. I guess all the witches just either died or moved to Canada or something. And as I said, 20 people were executed. Many more died in prison, and anyone named suffered torture and imprisonment on the flimsiest pretext. But don't worry, there was a fast day declared on January 14, 1697, so the people involved could reflect upon the event, quote, referring to the late tragedy raised among us by Satan and his instruments, unquote. And it took until at least 1711 for the last of the cases of the victims just trying to reclaim property lost while they were accused to be resolved and for their excommunication from the church to be reversed. And Salem wasn't the only witch panic in America, just the largest. The smaller panics were usually just one or two people accused, mostly because the people in their towns didn't like them very much. And what happened in Salem in 1692 is chalked up to all sorts of things, spanning from ergot poisoning to some bird-borne encephalitis, but some people feel that it was a stress response to the difficulties of living on the frontiers with the threat of Indian attacks hanging over the heads of colonists. And some claim it was just plain and simple spite that drove the accusations. And some people feel that it's just good old-fashioned economics. And I found some small thing to back this up in a paper published at a Serbian university, because never say I don't search for my sources. Quote, one of the more important works in this line of thought was by Boyer Nissenbaum studies Salem possessed in 1974, focused on two competing economic factions within the Salem community. One with the fortunes on the rise, those families who were inclined towards nearby prosperous ports of Salem town, and those with fortunes in decline, the families who were in favor of establishing an autonomous farming community in Salem Village. These authors claim that the declining faction used the witchcraft accusations to deal with their opponents.
But don't be mad at capitalism. Capitalism loves you.
But come on. We all know the real reasons for witch panics and witch trials. Look at who we're talking about here.
You've got to remember that these are just simple farmers. These are people of the land. The common clay of the New West. You know. Morons.
Because you would have to be some kind of human tundra to actually believe that people could fly on broomsticks, suckle demons, and put a curse on a pig. Because if these women did have some kind of mystical power, why the fuck would they allow you to torture them by stacking rocks on top of them in the first place? Because if I had a demon familiar and a bunch of buckle-hatted motherfuckers showed up at my goddamn door with their pitchforks and torches, I'm turning my little shit loose on them in a whirlwind of blood and flesh like a diabolical Looney Tunes character. I am playing the skin off Reverend Paris and turning Cotton Mather into a small toad and feeding him to my familiar. If witches were real, then they would have done some real witch shit to these fucking simpletons. They would have called down the unholy fury of the Dark Master and laid waste to Salem town in a fit of Old Testament fucking lamentation.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave. Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria.
But that isn't what happened. No, the great and powerful witches of Salem town, indeed of every town where a witch trial took place across Christendom, all they managed to do was make a couple of preteens twitch and tremble and a pharaoh pig stop suckling, which honestly is not impressive. It is in fact demeaning to the devil that they think his Luciferian majesty would stoop to such a low level. This is the fucking devil, people, not some low-rent prestidigitator at the Harvest fucking festival. It is insulting to say that this is the case.
Take it easy, Dave. Deep breaths.
Sorry, I get really mad when people underestimate the devil. And the reason none of that happened is because there were no witches in the hedgerows. All there were people that did not conform to an arbitrary standard of the majority. They were different. They were strange. They were foreign. So they were attacked on the flimsy pretext of protecting children. They were attacked as undesirable, not because of what they could do, just because of who they are. The people made up lies about them and put the sins of the worst among the accusers on the shoulders of the outsiders, accusing them of doing terrible things as an excuse to eliminate them. You know, the kind of thing that's happening right now. Like with our witches of the week, transgender people, who were accused of all the sins predominantly committed by white Christian men, not because they're hiding in bathrooms and assaulting women or luring children into their pedophile fantasies. Transgender people don't do that. They're not youth pastors or the president. All they are is just few in number and different is enough to get you killed when dipshits run wild. And the only difference between the witch panic and the trans panic is that transgender people actually fucking exist, and there is no such thing as fucking witches. Except, of course, for Wiccans, and we'll talk about them next week when we pick up for part 3 of Spooktacular 2025.
This Halloween, what's under your costume might just steal the show.
Wait, is that glow-in-the-dark underwear?
Boo, yeah. MeUndies has dropped their spookiest collection yet. Glow-in-the-dark undies and PJs so comfy it's scary.
Tricks, treats, buttery soft briefs.
Exactly. To get cozy and spooky for less, go to MeUndies.com/trick-or-treat and enter code TRICKORTREAT to get 20% off your first order. MeUndies. Treat yourself.
Your earbud fell in a coffee cup. You need a taco pick-me-up. When modern life gets rough, grab the timeless taste you love. Paso, the old El Paso.
That is it for the show this week and for this installment of Spooktacular 2025. I know every year I say, we're going to do some scary shit, and then every year I just tell you why the scary shit I'm talking about isn't real, because it isn't real. But then I talk about the real scary shit, and it's always about conservatism and capitalism. Sorry. I guess it isn't my fault that the truth is scarier than fiction. Speaking of fiction, rate and review us so folks can find us and figure out the facts from the fiction of your review. Kick us $1 at patreon.com/whatthehellpodcast. We use all that money for our Witches Defense Fund. Do all the things Jeremy tells you to do in the closing credits, otherwise I'm just not going to be allowed at the annual network coven meeting. And be sure to check out all the other spooky network shit going on all over the network at seltzerkings.com. And so for me, Dave, change my pitch up, Bledsoe, producer.
That's all? That's the entirety of the lyrics?
Gavin, and all the fictional members of our jury want to say, smacking your witch up is wrong, and you shouldn't do that. And we'll see you all next week for part 3 of Spooktacular 2025.
the Hell Were You Thinking stars Dave Bledsoe and features Gavin St. James and several fictional minions. The show is produced by Kimberly Steele and a part of the Seltzer Kings podcast network. You can find more information on the show on their website, whatthehellpodcast.com, or on Facebook as What the Hell Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I have no ending for this, so I take a small bow.
A what?
A Wiccan?
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.